Today we should find some time for questions and answers in the end. Will 20 minutes be enough? Huh? So remind me. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ضربت عليهم الذلة أينما ثقفوا إلا بحبل من الله وحبل من الناس وحبل من الناس وباعوا بغضب من الله وضربت عليهم المسكنة ذلك بأنهم كانوا يكفرون بآيات الله ويقتلون الأنبياء بغير حق ذلك بما عصوا وكانوا يعتدون ليسوا سواء من أهل الكتاب أمة قائمة يتلون آيات الله آناء الليل وهم يسجدون يؤمنون بالله واليوم الآخر ويأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر ويسارعون في الخيرات وأولئك من الصالحين وما يفعلوا من خير فلن يكفروا والله عليم بالمتقين إن الذين كفروا لن تغني عنهم أموالهم ولا أولادهم من الله شيئا وأولئك أصحاب النار هم فيها خالدون مثل ما ينفقون في هذه الحياة الدنيا كمثل ريح فيها سر أصابت حرث قوم ظلموا أنفسهم فأهلكته وما ظلمهم الله ولكن أنفسهم يظلمون يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا بطانة من دونكم لا يلونكم خبالا ودوا ما عنتم قد بدت البغضاء من أفواههم وما تخفي صدورهم أكبر قد بينا لكم الآيات إن كنتم تعقلون ها أنتم أولئك تحبونهم ولا يحبونكم وتؤمنون بالكتاب كله وإذا لقوكم قالوا آمنا وإذا خلوا عضوا عليكم الأنامل من الغيظ قل موتوا بغيظكم إن الله عليم بذات الصدور إن تمسسكم حسنة تسؤهم وإن تصبكم سيئة يفرحوا بها وإن تصبروا وتتقوا لا يضركم كيدهم شيئا إن الله بما يعملون محيط. Yesterday we were discussing the verse which I have recited in the beginning. ضربت عليهم الذلة أينما ثقفوا إلا بحبل من الله وحبل من الناس وباعوا بغضب من الله وضربت عليهم المسكنة. Commenting on this verse, I explained to you that Hablullah here means covenant of God, which God had given to the Jews much earlier, even much earlier, and this covenant has been mentioned in Surah Bani Israel, where Allah speaks of a promise given to the Jews that He would give them ascendancy over the Holy Land, not only once, but twice. This promise, according to most scholars, has been fulfilled even before the time of our Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And I was trying to put across to you that the second part of the promise was yet to be fulfilled. And when our Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came, this promise was to be fulfilled after that. And so when the Jews recaptured the Holy Land and they are still in the possession of the Holy Land, this is the second promise which is mentioned in Bani Israel, and that explains all the questions which are concomitant to this verse we are discussing. Illa bihablim minallahi wa hablim minan nas. The confusion created among the minds of the commentator is this, that when they have been cursed by God forever, when the Holy Quran specifically tells us that they will always live a life of abasement, then how could a covenant of God protect them for even a short period from this eternal curse? Because they have been believing mistakenly that both the promises had been filled in the past, so no part of the promise was left unfulfilled. So that was the confusion which created all this dilemma. But when you understand this verse in the light of what I have explained, then there is no confusion left at all. The present occupation, without doubt, is in fulfillment of that covenant, or the second part of that covenant. And their ascendancy is not contradictory to this declaration that they will live in abasement. The second part, which mentions Hablum minan nas, is those covenants or treaties which they have with non-Muslim powers and live under their protection. In fact, the occupation of Israel also has those ties. Now, yesterday I also visualized that event in the future when, according to the same promise mentioned in Bani Israel, the Jews would transgress once again and prove themselves to be again worthy of recipient of God's wrath. Then they will be ejected from the Holy Land. How it would happen and when it would happen, only Allah knows best. But I, as I understand from these verses of the Holy Quran, conjecture and I imagine that this is going to happen during a world holocaust, when new groupings would take place, when world would be shaken by a world war. And I believe that those powers which are protecting the Jews will have to revise their policies, and compulsions arising out of strategies would make them change their attitude towards the Muslims. And ultimately they would have to withdraw their support from Israel, and that would be the time when they will be ejected from the Holy Land, not by a direct clash between the Jews and the Muslims, but in a global situation like this is bound to happen. And from this I infer that this verse has in fact two different prophecies applying to two different phases. This again has been unfortunately been confused or have been understood in a manner that the earlier commentators themselves found themselves to be in difficulty to compare the two statements made in the verse which is under study. Number one, they know, of course, obviously, Duribat alayhimu zilla describes abasement, a situation where the people are without honor and they have been dishonored by God. In the end, this verse ends up in a strange way. Not this verse, but this statement ends up in a strange way when we read وَضُرِبَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ الْمَسْكَنَةِ. Now, maskana and zilla are two different things, and they describe two different attitudes. Zilla is a wrath of God expressed in terms of abasement and total lack of respect. Maskana, on the other hand, describes a situation where a people have submitted to their lot and they have become unobtrusive and they no longer create problems for the rest of the world. They have been reduced to a situation of helplessness, and zilla and maskana are two different things altogether. So, and this maskana is placed in juxtaposition to the promise وَبَاءُوا بِغَضَبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Now, after the ghadab, why there should be maskana? There should be zilla apparently. But as I have visualized the future, this statement falls into proper order and it becomes immediately understandable. What is going to happen is that, let's say first, the state of zilla or abasement is a continuous state of affairs, right from not only from the time of Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but from the earlier times when God had decided to curse the Jews because of some continuous misbehavior. So when these verses were revealed, the Jews were already found in the state of that zilla or abasement. This was to continue, except for hablu min Allah wa hablu min an-nas, these two occurrings. After that, according to the promise mentioned in Surah Bani Israel, when the Jews would be given granted reoccupation of the Holy Land, and when they would once again transgress, it would be then that a new expression of God's wrath would overtake them, and they would be made the target of that wrath of God. So Ba'u bi ghadabin here refers to that second manifestation of God's wrath, which would render them totally helpless and they would be ejected from the Holy Lands. After that, maskana is going to follow. Then all their haughtiness would be completely smashed and they will be brought down to earth, and they would realize that all that they have been trying to achieve, the ultimate object of ruling the entire world, this is the ultimate object of Israel, has been totally frustrated, and they would find themselves helpless and friendless. Then they are going to start a new phase in their life, and the word maskana applies to that last phase. ذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ كَانُوا يَكْفُرُونَ بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ وَيَقْتُلُونَ الْأَنْبِيَاءَ بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ. This is because they have been rejecting the signs of Allah and they have been murdering prophets بِغَيْرِ حَقٍّ, without justification. This part of the verse has all again raised questions, and they have presented the earlier commentators with two problems mainly. Number one, يَقْتُلُونَ الْأَنْبِيَاءَ. Have they really been murdering prophets? And how many? This is the question. Now, if you study the history as preserved by the Holy Quran and the history as preserved by the Bible, Old Testament or the New Testament, you come across very few incidents where actually the Jews murdered prophets. You come across the incident of Hazrat Yahya, but he was not murdered by Jews. You come across the incident of Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. Although Jews were involved in having him crucified, but the Holy Quran tells us that they failed to achieve the result and they failed to murder him. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ يَقِينًا. They simply failed to have him murdered. So there is no murder involved. So who are those prophets? This has been the question raised by the earlier commentators, and some have just passed by it without answering. And some say that it is their general animosity towards the message and towards the prophets, which has been described here as an act of qatl. And in Surah Tafsir Kabir and Tafsir Saghir, etc., you also find the same attitude. And this explains to a large degree the repeated allegation by the Holy Quran, accusation I should say by the Holy Quran, that they have been customarily, regularly, constantly murdering their prophets. But I have another explanation to offer as well. When you speak of prophets, you are not only speaking of prophets but their followers as well. When Archangel was addressed, all the angels under him were also addressed. And when God met, as we see in the parable of Satan being addressed as why he did not prostrate before Adam, we remember that Satan was never ordered to do that, but it were the angels. So this question has been raised and discussed by earlier commentators as well. They are astounded to discover that there is no specific order given to Satan. The Holy Quran only mentions an order given to the angels. And then Allah brings Satan to book and holds him responsible for not prostrating. What is this? The answer is very obvious, and everybody has offered the same explanation, that when leaders, those who are worthy of mention, they are given orders, all who follow them are also included in that order. So in the Holy Quran we find some orders specifically addressed to Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam alone, with the address with single ka. And yet all the Muslim scholars agree that the entire ummah is addressed there. So perhaps, and I believe this is so, this is the style of the Holy Quran when it says you have been murdering prophets. What it means to say is that when you murder their followers for no crime of their own except that they believed in the message of the prophets, then it is tantamount to murdering the prophets. And as far as your desire is concerned, you would have left no stone unturned to murder the prophets themselves. So it's the entire attitude of hostility unleashed towards the messengers and their followers. God specifically, specially saved the prophets so that the message could be saved. But those who were murdered just because of their belief in the prophets were as if the prophets themselves were murdered. So this is the one problem which has been discussed by the earlier commentators, and this is the answer as I find it appropriate in this context. And the second question they have been raising is the Jews used to do it prior to the time of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, and they are being punished for the crimes of their forefathers. What justification there is in this? This issue has been raised by most Muslim scholars, and they say, I'll refer to some of the commentators to explain how they try to reconcile this apparent lack of justification. In Tafsir Ruhul Bayan, the explanation given is this: although this act was committed by those Jews who had earlier passed away in history, long before the Holy Quran was revealed, so why should those Jews who followed later on, much later in history, be punished for the crimes of their elders? The explanation is that these Jews were in fact happy and fully satisfied with the behavior of those Jews who committed those crimes, and they fully approved of that behavior. Now this is an answer, but it doesn't hold water at all, because most of the crimes committed by the earlier Jews against their prophets were roundly condemned by those Jews who followed much later. They were not directly involved. So why should they be punished for the crimes of those who came earlier? In fact, the similar answers are given by almost all scholars. In fact, what happened was that it was the same Jews who repeated their attitude vis-a-vis Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and by doing so they proved that they in fact approved of that attitude, and when given the chance they repeated the same thing. Now this is a historical fact that actual attempts to murder Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam took place by the Jews of his time. It is on record that some Jews, a Jewish woman, even succeeded in poisoning him. It is on record that while he was resting by the side of a wall, a brick was thrown from above. It was a Jewish house, from the roof, with the intention to murder him. And with the grace of Allah, he was saved because it missed the target. And many other attempts are reported in history. So they have been doing that, not in the past, but they repeated this attitude towards the living prophet of the time, the very best among them, who was in fact the embodiment of all the prophets before him. In his message were included all the messages which were worthy of preservation, and the Holy Quran specifically mentions it, that this is a book فيها كتب قيمة, which contains all the earlier teachings which were qayyim, which means which had that inner quality of being preserved forever. So the Prophet also, the recipient of this book, was Jame'ul Anbiya in his characters. All the best characters and attributes of earlier prophets were made to be personified in the life of Hazrat Muhammad Mustafa sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when they attempted to murder him, in fact they attempted to murder every prophet. It was the prophethood to which they were opposed. And by repeating this crime, they made themselves vulnerable to Allah's wrath. The second thing is that they were given again a chance to prove that they have been repaired themselves, they have rectified their behavior, and they have changed their attitude. And the second time the possession of the Holy Land was given to them. So it was not just a historical crime for which the Jews, future Jews in relation to the time of Muhammad were to be punished. It was made manifestly clear by giving them repeated chances of mending their ways. Yet, as we observe from the history as unfolded from the time of Muhammad, they did not make avail of those chances, did not mend their ways, and even today in occupation of the Holy Land, they are continuously conspiring, not only against the world of Islam, but in fact against the entire world. Their ultimate goal is that dream which they have been cherishing from the time of Hazrat Dawood ﷺ, that they would emerge as the one single supreme power in the world. And the world government is the ultimate goal they are pursuing. So some people may not understand it. They always think that Jews are only pitched against the Muslims. It's not so. In fact, they are not pitched against anybody. They are pitched against the entire world, and their goal is their ultimate domination. I have read some books on this subject, and the Jewish authors, although they do not admit this in so many words, but by implications have mentioned this, and some commentators on the Jewish attitude have also taken up this subject. The substance of all this is that they justify their attitude on two things, on two scores. Number one, they really genuinely believe that it is not a mischief, it's not a conspiracy at all. It is a destiny which has been promised by God, and this destiny is bound to be fulfilled. Now, where is that destiny mentioned? This is the question. And I have already pointed out to you that the promise given in the Bible was about al-ard. Now, this word has been misunderstood by the earliest Jewish interpreters. God never made a promise to them that they would be given ascendancy over the whole world. The promise only was limited to the Holy Land, and al-ard here should be understood as the Holy Land, no more. And in the light of this, when you read the various references in the Old Testament, then the whole subject becomes very clear. Repeatedly, many prophets like Moses, like Joseph, so many others have been mentioned as endeavoring to return to the Holy Land, not to the whole world. So that promise somehow got misinterpreted by the earlier Jewish scholars, and the result is that the present day Jewish scholars of a certain brand do genuinely believe that by al-ard God meant the entire world, and this was the promise which was given to Hazrat Dawood ﷺ. That is why the Holy Quran has made it specifically clear there. that the promise was this, not that which you understand. And secondly, they believe that a government, world government under Jewish control would be the most benevolent government for mankind. So any sacrifice on the way to achievement of a noble goal is justified. As some people say, it is the end which justifies the means. The Holy Quran rejects this and would never agree with this, with such a disastrous attitude, because in the name of noble ends you can take such ignoble steps, such destructive measures as would destroy the peace of mankind. It is said that the road to hell is paved by the bricks of good intentions. But the bricks of good intentions are not laid by the layers of those bricks in the direction of hell. This is the big confusion, which makes them go on following the path of hell, because they think they are laying the bricks in the path of heaven. And because the end product justifies the means according to them, so they go on doing this. The Holy Quran stresses very repeatedly that no unjustified act would be permissible for the achievement of any noble goal. The goal has to be noble as well as the measures to achieve that goal. لَيْسُوا سَوَاءً مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ أُمَّةٌ قَائِمَةٌ يَتْلُونَ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ آنَاءَ اللَّيْلِ وَهُمْ يَسْجُدُونَ. They are not all alike. مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ أُمَّةٌ قَائِمَةٌ. Among the people of the book, there is a section which is still holding, is steadfast in their teachings and holding fast to the teachings of Torah. يَتْلُونَ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ آنَاءَ اللَّيْلِ وَهُمْ يَسْجُدُونَ. They go on reciting the verses of God, verses revealed to them, the night long. وَهُمْ يَسْجُدُونَ, and they are in a state of prostration. The earlier commentators were also found themselves in difficulty in commenting on this verse on 2 points. Number one, simple and the apparent difficulty they found was in the word yasjudun. They thought that it were the Muslims alone who prostrated in the style as we have been taught, and the Jews, when they prayed, they did not prostrate in the same manner. So why should the Jews be mentioned here as prostrating before God like the Muslims do? This has been answered in 2 ways. By those who are, who go deeper into things, and those scholars who are holier and higher in their status with God, they have attempted to resolve this problem by suggesting that the word sajda is not the form which you know, and that alone. The form which we know as sajda is just a symbol of soul's prostration. So, وَهُمْ يَسْجُدُونَ refers to that state of the attitude of people who prostrate in their minds, in their hearts, in their souls before God, and as such, this description is befitting even for those Jews who are within their heart pious and God-fearing, and even if they do not prostrate formally like we do, there are among them, according to this statement, who are very pious and who remain in prostration before God while they remember Him at night. The second explanation is that this word yasjudun, and in fact the entire verse, is applicable not to Jews, but only to those among them who have become Muslims. And as such, there is no problem. The second difficulty they found was again pertaining to this part of my statement. Were there really people among Jews who had not accepted Islam and who are praised in such high terms by Allah Himself? There are people among them who are steadfast in their teachings, who hold fast to the covenant they made with Allah, who believe in Yawm Akhirah and all that, and believe in God, and who are so pious and holy they keep awaking the whole night remembering Allah. This is a very beautiful description. So these scholars find themselves too miserly to admit that such a high compliment could be paid to anybody outside Islam, particularly to Jews. And they say, no, this verse is only applicable to such Muslims who erstwhile had been Jews. But you read the whole context, it's impossible. There is no room whatsoever for extending the meaning to this, outside the domain of this, the application of this verse. It is speaking of Jews in some very severe terms, and yet reminding us, like the Holy Quran has been reminding us repeatedly elsewhere, that you must never condemn a people entirely, without exception. Even among the worst people, who can be described as worst as a whole, they are good, pious people of God. And this is a statement which is found so true in everyday life that no sane man can deny it. Even among Hindus who are idolaters, even among atheists, you find such people who are kindly disposed towards humanity. So why not among religions, which were once revealed by God, who were given books? There are bound to be some good people among them who genuinely believe in God. Otherwise, this wholehearted condemnation would put Islam at a disadvantage. The rest of the world would not believe, would not understand an attitude of a book which condemns wholeheartedly, entirely, the entire of the rest of the world, without leaving any room for such people who can be found as good people outside Islam. This is unrealistic. This is untrue. So the Holy Quran is magnanimous in its attitude. Those who have smaller hearts and niggardly attitudes, they attribute their own attitudes and transfer them to the Holy Quran and interpret these verses as, again, in their own miserly view of the world. They think, no, outside Islam there is no goodness whatsoever. This is untrue. The Holy Quran has spoken on this subject repeatedly. I have been quoting some of these verses. I have quoted some of these verses during my address on the 24th here in London, and I made it very specifically clear that Islam leaves room for other faiths also in acquiring goodness, though not in majority cases, at least in small numbers. So these are the people who are being mentioned, because the Holy Quran does not want the Muslims to be narrow-minded, small in their stances, and bigoted and arrogant. So that is why whenever you find a statement of condemnation, there always follows a statement of rectification of attitudes. When a people are condemned, they are condemned on solid grounds. So there is no gainsaying that. But suddenly, the question arises, if they are the bad people, then we must hate them. Then God rectifies us, that attitude, and warns us, no, I want you to be the best people who are being described. Kuntum khaira ummatin ukhrijat linnasi. This is the subject of discussion. How could a people be khaira ummah which nurtures the attitudes of hatred within their hearts against all those who do not belong to that ummah? It's impossible to conceive that attitude. How could you be the best who were ever raised for the benefit of mankind, and yet you are raised in hatred, in narrow-mindedness, in bigotry? So that is the reason why the Holy Quran repeatedly rectifies our attitude by making such statements. لَيْسُوا سَوَاءً مِنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ أُمَّةٌ قَائِمَةٌ يَتْلُونَ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ آنَاءَ اللَّيْلِ وَهُمْ يَسْجُدُونَ. And then it is followed by that verse which we find mentioned elsewhere, speaking on the same subject in principle. يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. It doesn't say يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَبِمُحَمَّدٍ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ. يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَبِكَ. It doesn't say that. It simply follows, if only those Jews were mentioned in the earlier verse who had believed in Ahmad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then this was the occasion where this should have been made clear. But instead, something else is made clear. The verse says, يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. They also believe in God at least. There is no doubt about it. وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ. And they also believe in the day of resurrection, the day of judgment. يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنكَرِ. They admonish good deeds, admonish people to do good deeds and be righteous, and they prevent them from doing bad things. Not only in the religious term, but bad things as understood by man as such. So they advise them to abstain from doing evil. وَيُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ. And they vie with each other in acts of goodness. وَأُولَٰئِكَ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. They are among the righteous people. So this has been made manifestly clear that it is not those Jews who were earlier Jews which are mentioned. It is the people of the book all over the world. Some of them received the message at the time of when the verse was revealed, and not all of them adopted the same attitude of hostility. Among them were some pious people who might have been in minority, so they were not able to influence the majority of the Jews who were obviously hostile to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his message. But remember, the Holy Quran is the book for the entire world. It had in view not only those small number of Jews who were confronting Islam at that time, but the Jews all over the world and for all times to come. How could the Holy Quran make it an entire wholehearted condemnation which left no room for exception? It is not so. The second thing to be noted is that the same scholars who believe that these verses apply only to Hazrat Ibn Salam and Abdullah bin Salam and other converts from the Jewish faith to Islam, at the same time believe that this verse gives license to Muslims to force others, to compel others to do goods and to abstain from doing bad things. This has been discussed earlier. So there is an inherent contradiction in these two attitudes. If this verse applies really to those who have been mentioned generally, although I have not been able to mention all their names, but Abdullah bin Salam is a very well-known figure among them, then their attitude should have explained the true meaning of this verse. Here the Holy Quran says, they are the people who actually are doing these things. يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ وَيُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ. And we do not find a single incident, not a single incident, when we discover these converts taking the law into their own hands and forcing the kuffar or other Jews to do good things or to prevent them forcibly from doing bad things. Not one single incident is reported in history about their doing it. And yet the Holy Quran gives this verdict forever. These are the people, يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. So at least they should admit that their interpretation regarding this verse about application of force and rectification of people's conduct is wrong. But they are wrong on both counts, in fact. Who are mentioned are not the Muslims, but the Jews actually, or other people like other Christians as well, who fall into the same category of being Ahl Kitab. وَمَا يَفْعَلُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلَنْ يُكْفَرُوهُ وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ بِالْمُتَّقِينَ. Again, this categorical statement is made because Allah wanted to remove our misunderstanding about God's behavior. It says, as I have promised you, that whatever good deeds you do will not go waste. As long as you are honest and genuine and do things for my sake, I give a guarantee that none of your good deeds would go waste. They would be rewarded and their record would be kept by God. So also I give this promise to Ahl Kitab. With this implied condition that if you do these things for the sake of God, genuinely, purely, with good intentions, then you have no fears to entertain. You must rest assured that you will be rewarded by God and you will find favor with Him. وَمَا يَفْعَلُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلَنْ يُكْفَرُوهُ. Whatever good they do, they should rest assured that that good would be recognized by God. Yukfuru means that they will not find God ingrate in His attitude to their goodness. They will not find God without gratitude. Wallahu alimun bil muttaqin, and God knows who is God-fearing. So as far as the final criterion with God is concerned, it always has been and will always be the criterion of there being a good, genuine, honest heart. That is the preliminary definition of taqwa. So if a heart is genuinely submissive to God, if there is genuine love in a heart, whatever the name of the faith of the possessor of that heart be, God would always show mercy to such hearts who are genuine and honest, and God knows in which heart there is taqwa, and or that is to say, the genuine fear of Allah and the genuine love of God. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَن تُغْنِيَ عَنْهُمْ أَمْوَالُهُمْ وَلَا أَوْلَادُهُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَيْئًا وَأُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ هم فيها خالدون مثل ما ينفقون في هذه الحياة الدنيا كمثل ريح فيها سر أصابت حرث قوم ظلموا أنفسهم فأهلكته وما ظلمهم الله ولكن أنفسهم يظلمون. Now here again there is a verse which raises some questions regarding the true interpretation of the previous verse. This verse says, as for those who disbelieve, their possessions and their children shall not avail them aught against Allah, and they are the inmates of the fire, therein shall they abide. As for those who disbelieve. Now the question is this statement in contradiction of the earlier statement? Who are those who were mentioned earlier if they are a section of the Jewish society as well? Then they have not believed in Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So what does it mean that those who have disbelieved? There are two or maybe some other explanations, but I'll take them one after the other as they come to my mind. Number one is that you must have noted that the word Iman in the first instance was mentioned only in relation to God. Yu'minuna billahi wal yawmil akhir. So here, kufr also should be related to the same, in the same context. So that would mean that there are Ahle Kitab who in fact do not believe in God. Within themselves, they have no faith. And this is true not only of Ahle Kitab, but of when you scan the world of religion, you will find such people in every religion. Their faith in God is only skin deep. It is only superficial and for showing off. But whenever put to trial, they fail to pass the test of faith. And they do it regularly in everyday life. They are those who would not abstain from doing bad things for the sake of God in whom they apparently believe. They go on acting cruelly and in sometimes beastly to the creatures of Allah. In this society there are people who apparently belong to Christianity and who do evil things to their own innocent children. Crime is on the rampant everywhere in all societies which apparently are religious societies who apparently believe in God. So also there are Jews, and there is a great number among them who in fact do not believe in God. And I have come across some myself. And when I investigated deeper, I found that their true faith is just a faith of community. Their faith, their loyalties are only towards a community, that is Jewish community. So in fact, if you examine the world of religion, you will discover that nationalism is not only oriented towards geographical boundaries, but nationalisms are also oriented towards religious boundaries. So what the binding force of most religions today is religious nationalism rather than their faith in God or fear of God. So also there is a growing tendency among the Muslims to speak of Muslim nationalism. You see what you discovered today in relation to Azerbaijan and other such areas in Russia, where things have started happening, and suddenly these Muslims become dear to the rest of the world. They existed even before. They were in a more pitiable state. They should have drawn the attention of the entire Muslim world far more before these happenings. Because at that time there was no freedom for them to exercise their religion properly. And this was the most pitiable state. They didn't take pity when Islam was in danger, when there was a chance of their gaining a national entity in the name of Islam, then they all became interested. So it is nationalism which you find as an underlying cohesive force in all religions of the world today, unfortunately. Hinduism in India, which is the religion of 70 to 80 million, 800 million, 7 to 800 million people, or more than that. I know in crores, 100,000 is one lakh, and 100,000 is one crore. 10 million. 10 million is 1 crore. So the Hindus are estimated to be 70 crore in India. So how much that would be? 700 million. That's fine. That would be correct. So among those 700 million people, those who are the ruling class and are the educated class, if you meet them and discuss their faith with them, you will be surprised to learn that they have no faith in that idolatry which is the central point of Hinduism. They just take Hinduism as nationality. And the masses also, even those who worship idols, their real faithfulness is not to God but to a concept of nationalism. So the Holy Quran, when it speaks of Innal Lazina Kafaru in that context, is pointing out to that truth, that although apparently they are Ahle Kitab, they should have believed in God, but you will find that in most cases they do not believe in God. They only believe in Jewish entity. And all their efforts are towards materialism, to gain wealth and to exercise power through their wealth. So the verse is exactly describing this situation. It says, Innal lazina kafaru lan tughniya anhum amwaluhum wala auladuhum min Allahi shay'a. All their faith is collection of wealth and exercising their power and increasing in number and wealth, and to try to oppose Islam with their wealth and their number. Ulaika ashabun nar. They are the hell-bound people, or in other words, they are living in hell at present. This is the description of their the inner condition of their hearts. Those who are committed, those who are mentioned here, are not all the Jews, but like the earlier exception, another exception is being made. Some of them were good, and some of them are real bad. These are the real bad ones who are being described here, in contrast to the earlier statement. The opposite end belongs to those who are committed enemies of Islam. And the hell here is not described as a promise, although most interpreters would have it that way, but it is not said that they would go to hell. It says, وَأُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ, they are the hellish people. So this is not only a promise, this is a statement of fact, or statement of facts. And this is a statement of facts that those who oppose a faith and find all their efforts frustrated are suffering through hell. They keep on burning within, and they can't help it. So this is the hell which is primarily being described here. And this is the section of Jewish society which is foremost in their animosity towards Islam. The second possibility is إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَن تُغْنِيَ عَنْهُمْ أَمْوَالُهُمْ وَلَا أَوْلَادُهُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَيْئًا. Here, kafaru would apply to Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of course, but it would mean that those among the non-believers who have been delivered the message and who do not change their attitude and who unjustifiably oppose the message and conspire against it, those are the people who are mentioned here only. Not all of them who did not believe in Hazrat sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So as such, the further qualification لَن تُغْنِيَ عَنْهُمْ أَمْوَالُهُمْ وَلَا أَوْلَادُهُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَيْئًا explains the whole situation, that they are the people who have pitched all their might, their wealth against Islam, and God declares it that all their efforts would be frustrated, and they are the hellish people. مَثَلُ مَا يُنْفِقُونَ فِي هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا كَمَثَلِ رِيحٍ فِيهَا سِرٌّ أَصَابَتْ حَرْثَ قَوْمٍ ظَلَمُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَأَهْلَكَتْهُ. Again, they are further defined so that no doubt is left in the minds of any Muslim that these verses are not contradictory to the earlier statement that among Jews there are good people. The whole, the sum and substance of these verses would be, there are good people among the Jews, there are bad people among the Jews, they should not be condemned entirely as a class, they should be treated on merit. Where you find goodness, you must recognize as a people of truth. Where you find evil, you must condemn that evil. And be realistic and pragmatic in your attitudes. This is the sum total of the discussion here and the essence of the message which is being delivered. And now it is said, it was suggested earlier in the verse I have recited, that they are employing their wealth to oppose Islam. But also they are employing their wealth in apparently good deeds. So there are two areas where their wealth is spent. One in opposition to Islam, and the first verse deals with that part of it. The second in doing apparently good deeds, but not with the intention of pleasing God, because they do not genuinely believe in God, but with an intention to show off, to make an impression on the world that they are good, pious people. They would have many foundations, charitable foundations, they would have many schools for the poor, orphanages, hospitals and so on. But because the intentions would not be to please God, because they are described as non-believers in this essence, their intention only is to further their own image and to show off to the world that they are the real good people. Their masal, the likeness of that attitude has been described here in this verse. كَمَثَلِ رِيحٍ فِيهَا سِرٌّ. All their apparent spending in good cause is like a chilly wind which blows at sub-zero temperatures on the crops of a people who are cruel to themselves. So it's a beautiful simile. In case of such crops as are destroyed by the blowing of extremely chilly, freezing winds, the situation is that the wind is from outside. It is not the creation of the farmer himself. But here the simile is extended further, and it is said that their case is like those who blow off their own products, their own efforts, and destroy their own crops. So what they spend is destroyed by their ignoble attitude and the wind of their bad intentions blows on the acts of their goodness like a chilly wind, and it totally destroys the apparent crop of their labors in the name of goodness for humanity, in the name of service of humanity. فَأَهْلَكَتْهُ وَمَا ظَلَمَهُمُ اللَّهُ. These are the people who are in fact not wronged by God, but they wrong themselves. Now this last statement is very significant and should always be remembered, that whatever wrath of God befalls people, in reality, the sum total of their own bad deeds is reflected against them. And their evil itself takes the shape of such forces as punish them. If you study the history of mankind, you will always discover it, that the wrath of God did not come from outside, unrelated to the deeds of people. It were the deeds of the people which resulted in their cruelty to their own fellow human beings. And as such, all their good deeds were destroyed by them themselves. This is the repeated assertion of the Holy Quran which should be understood. Most people, unfortunately, do not relate these things. They think the acts of man are occurring in some different area, and the wrath comes from a different area, in some supernatural form. Occasionally it happens that the forces of nature are employed, but that happens on very special occasions of people's opposition to prophets, when natural forces have not yet accumulated enough to punish them, and if they were permitted to continue exercising their hostility, there was a real danger of the message being wiped out. At such occasions, exceptional decrees of Allah are in operation. And then you see things like flood of Noah or stoning of the people from the heaven and this and that. Of course, they are natural phenomena, but properly harnessed by God's will to punish a people. But in general, there is a law of nemesis which continuously works, and people don't understand. So that is why the Holy Quran has to make repeated statements. It is the people themselves who do wrongs to themselves. God does not have to punish them from outside. Their evil is enough to punish the evildoer. So with that we end the dars for today, but we'll sit for a few more minutes, 20 minutes or so, for question answers. Yes, please. Please, would you kindly walk up to the microphone and speak into it so that your question is also recorded? And would you turn the face of the listener? Yes, thank you.
In time to come, Israelites will be ejected from the Holy Land. And yesterday, because it happened in the past by a non-Muslim power. Well, if that happens, what will be the fate of the Arabs? They will be still the losers, you see.
Fine.
What will happen to the Arabs? They will still remain the losers.
No, you don't remember the whole statement I made. I said that there is one verse which speaks of the punishment of God, of Jews at the hands of Allah's decree when they misbehave once again. And I also quoted another verse at the end of Bani Israel. I'm sorry, that's in Surah Anbiya, not in Bani Israel. Also in the end there is mention of this in different words. Yes. No, this is the same verse. First of all, let me take up the matter in chronological order. First I mentioned the verses, early verses from Bani Israel, from 5 to 9. And remember that in the end the conclusion which is drawn is this: فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ الْآخِرَةِ لَيَسُوءُ وُجُوهَكُمْ وَلَيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. And remember that when the time of the fulfillment of the second promise would come, it would take place ultimately to bring ignominy to you, to your faces. Because it's explained why. وَلَيَدْخُلُوا الْمَسْجِدَ كَمَا دَخَلُوهُ أَوَّلَ مَرَّةٍ. And at the time of the second promise, you would again enter the mosque, that is known as
Solomon's temple.
The temple, Solomon's temple, and as Masjid Aqsa to the Muslims. So they would enter that mosque once again as they had entered before. وَلَيُتَبِّرُوا مَا عَلَوْا تَتْبِيرًا. And so that they create the same disorder and play havoc with peace and misuse their ascendancy like they did it earlier. Then what would happen? عَسَىٰ رَبُّكُمْ أَن يَرْحَمَكُمْ. It is likely that Allah would show mercy to you because He's giving you a second chance. Don't misunderstand. It is not with the will of Allah that you will receive that punishment. God does not want to punish you. It is a chance offered to you so that Allah may show mercy upon you. The second time is given to you. وَإِنْ أُتُّمْ أُدْنَا. But if you repeated your earlier misbehavior, then you will be punished. This is the promise given by God. وَجَعَلْنَا جَهَنَّمَ لِلْكَافِرِينَ حَصِيرًا. This is one promise which should be understood and kept in mind, but in the light of other statements, we can positively conclude that ultimately they will fail in this test, and by indulging in transgression, they would incur the wrath of Allah and they would be made to lose possession of the Holy Land and the mosque. The other statement which refers to your question particularly is this: وَلَقَدْ كَتَبْنَا فِي الزُّبُورِ مِنْ بَعْدِ ذِكْرِ أَنَّ الْأَرْضَ يَرِثُهَا عِبَادِيَ الصَّالِحُونَ. That we have made this definite, strong promise. We had made it a decree. Katabna means, in fact, we had made it a decree, which is written in Zabur. Min ba'di zikri, after Allah's memory was extolled, Annal arda yarithuha ibadiy salihun, that in the end, al-ard, that is the Holy Land, would be inherited by my righteous people. Now, this is a promise which is unshakable and unchangeable, because it is the word kitab is used here, which means a promise which would never change. Inna fi haza la balaghan liqawmin abidin. Please try to understand the import of this message. This is what is followed. It says, Inna fi haza la balaghan liqawmin abidin. Those people who worship God as God should be worshipped, for them there is a very important message in this. What is that message? That you will not be able to dispossess Jews of the Holy Lands and capture Holy Land for yourself
until you fulfill this condition and meet this condition, that you in the sight of Allah have become righteous. The promise was that ultimately the righteous would inherit. So if they do not prove righteous, still it would not be enough. Unless there are righteous people to replace them, this is not going to happen. So that is why I very strongly advised during the earlier dars, and also whenever some Arabs come and take up this issue with me, I always strongly advise to them. I said, this is the Holy Quran's advice and there can be no change in this. If you really genuinely want to return to the Holy Land, you must follow the advice of Allah and consider and examine your own behavior. Try to be genuinely righteous. If you become righteous, then your war will be taken up by those powerful people whom Allah would create or commission to punish the wrong occupants and to make them vacate the possession of the Holy Land, and then it would be Allah who would replace them by the righteous people. This is the whole story.
Yes. So for want of time, I couldn't ask you a question last Sunday's there is. Can I ask that question?
Please, please.
Now you said there were 72 sects before the advent of the promised Messiah, peace be upon him. What was the then scholarly opinion about the 73rd sect? Because they knew there was going to be a 73rd sect as well.
You see, this is something which has always remained obscure. You see, the number 72 was not a number which reached so visibly in any set period of history that all the Muslims saw, now we have become 72, and the 73rd, whichever appears, is bound to be the right. It never happened like that. History has been unfolding itself differently and quietly, visibly and invisibly, in different parts of the world, and there was no one single viewer which could topically view the history and count the sects and say, look here, now we start to get ready for the 73rd. It never happened like that and never happens like that. In fact, in Al-Milal wa Nihal, some 72 sects have been mentioned. But many of the sects were born after that. And many of the sects mentioned in that book have been wiped out from the face of earth. So it's an ever-changing process of history. And the word 72 should not be taken, so strictly to mean exactly 72. Otherwise, it would be impossible for anyone to point his fingers at 1, 2, 3, 4 and 72 and declare this is 72, this is the 73rd. This is now how religions take shape. The fact is that generally believing in this, in the message, we should believe that around 72 sects, as had occurred in the Jewish faith, would take place. Now God knows which 72 he was referring to when he spoke of the Jews, because the question begins with Jewish history, not with the Islamic history. So you must relate both of them and then study them together. When you study the Jewish history, you cannot say and you cannot prove to the Jews that look here, you got divided into 72. In response, they would laugh at you and they say, where is the proof? Who told you we are 72? We were 72. And if you read the history of schism among Judaism, you will find a number much larger than that, or claimed by some as to be smaller than that. So this question should not be taken, so naively, too literally. Whatever happened in the history of Jewish people earlier, something of that nature was to be repeated. And because we cannot positively pinpoint 72 in that history, So we should not expect ourselves to be able to pinpoint 72 in the history following the declaration of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But that same hadith makes the issue which is worth resolving so clear that the confusion about 72 becomes irrelevant to the question. When Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was asked, how would we know which is the Jama'ah, who is the heavenly bound, and which 72 sects are those which are hell bound, the answer was not this to which you are pointing out in reality. The answer was not that you count the 72 first and the 73rd is going to be the Jama'ah, so where is the confusion? He could have said it if that was meant. That was not meant. Or the answer would have been very simple. Keep counting the number of the growing sects into 72. When they reach the 72, whichever Jamaat appears after that or claims to be the 73rd, follow it. The answer was, Ma ana alayhi wa ashabi. You have to make effort to recognize that sect or that Jama'ah by comparing their behavior or their fate to the behavior and fate of me and my people. Whatever is happening to me, ma ana alayhi wa ashabi. At whatever state you find me and my followers, that sect would occupy the same position in the committee of Muslim sects at that time. So that has to be the Jama'ah.
Yes.
I explained earlier that applying to although almost all sects, to my knowledge, have been claiming they are the Jama'ah and the rest of the 72, but they have not been able to prove it on the touchstone which has been provided to us by Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We can, if the others listen and if they have a mind to genuinely investigate, by pointing out that we are the only sect in Islam who claims to be a Jama'ah, which have been entirely, totally rejected by the remaining 72, and against whom they have joined forces to punish us, to persecute us, and to deprive us of all those fundamental rights which were denied earlier to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his followers. Now, this seems to be a tall statement, but it is so true that nobody can refute it in any way. Because you can see it. To prove to be that Jama'ah, you have to go through the mill of persecution, which is not in your hands but in the hands of your enemy. So the choice to prove you to be the right people lies in the hands of your enemies and not your own hands. What lies in your own hands is only to exercise and show patience. So in this regard, this test has been presented to us, and with the grace of Allah, we have passed this test. Right?
Thank you very much. Assalamu.
Any other question? Because, please, yes, Dr. Sahib, was it Shakir Sahib? Yes, please. You see, although the time for prayer is fixed at 2 o'clock, but because this is going to be the last verse, and because... No, just a minute. The last verse on this chapter, the last verse which you are referring to is in fact a dua session, which is preceded by a short verse on the last 3 surahs of the Holy Quran. So I didn't have that in mind. Yes. So I'll extend the time for a few more minutes for question and answers.
I would like to thank you for enlightening us.
Please come closer.
For enlightening us about the Jews. And you have spent yesterday, a good time, and good time today. Jews are very important people today's world, and they are making trouble all over the world in these days. Nowadays, all the Jews are immigrating to Israel.
All the Jews?
Well, all Jews from all over the world.
Yes, that's right.
They're coming from Russia,
correct,
all over the
correct,
world.
yes,
They're coming to
yes.
Israel, they're getting together.
But Jaina Bekum Lafifa, that is the word, where there is a verse which I told you to bring. That is in the end of Bani Israel, I remember. Find out.
And Hazur has mentioned that there are some bad Jews and good Jews. It has always been in all the nations that there are some good and some bad. But today, if we can see in Israel, we can't see anything good coming out from there. The bad
What do you
has...
mean by good coming out of it? I never said a good would come out of the evil.
Yes.
What I said was that among every people, there are such people as are good.
Hazur.
And nobody can condemn a people in totality.
Yes.
This has been the message of the Holy Quran throughout consistently, and there is no exception in that. Even the worst people have some good people among them.
Of course, yes.
And even the worst person also, I'll add to this statement, even the worst sinner has some good points in him as well. And this has been pointed out by Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam himself. It's a beautiful tradition. It speaks on this question. Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam told us that if God were to focus his attention on the evil of the people he has created, then God will not have any connection with any human being whatsoever. He would sever his ties with all, because every human being has some weakness at least. Bashari kamzori, as we call it, the human weaknesses and shortcomings were also shared by prophets. They forgot, they committed some mistakes, not intentionally, but of course they were human weaknesses. So no one is without sin, and those who are without sin, they are not without weakness. So Ahmad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, God would sever ties with all his creation. But because he looks at good points, so he is in contact with all his creation, because there is none of his creation which is totally without a good point. Even among the swines and other animals which you hate so much, there are very good points. Even among the dogs, there are characteristics which can be quoted as example for the best human beings. Their faithfulness, their loyalty to their masters, to the hands that feeds them, is outstanding. So neither condemn a people wholeheartedly and entirely, nor condemn a person so totally as if there were no goodness in him. Remember this message of Islam, and then you will always remain on the right path. Okay? But your question has yet to come.
Yes.
Please.
Zura, I was looking at the achievements of the Jews. They put Jesus Christ on cross, and the Jews are all over the world today.
Yes.
In the same way, in the time of Holy Prophet of Islam, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they tried to poison him. They tried everything to destroy Islam, and by the grace of God, the Muslims are all over the world. These are the achievements of the Jews. Well, what are
Muslims are all over the world, you said, and you said this is the achievement of Jews?
Well, I'm thinking, you see, that's what they achieved in a way.
I see. In failing to achieve their purpose.
Yes,
That's what you mean?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So what I'm thinking is maybe they are coming to an end. They're coming to one point from all over the world. And is it so that their last time they are coming to their death in Israel when the nuclear war is going to start? They're going to end up in Israel.
You see, thank you very much for reminding me of the verse in which I was searching so much, and pointedly I said, repeatedly I told the Prior Secretary to open up the end of Bani Israel, where there he will find the verse which I am searching. So it's exactly there. When you said they were coming from all over the world, then I was reminded of this verse. وَقُلْنَا مِنْ بَعْدِهِ No. وَقُلْنَا مِنْ بَعْدِهِ لِبَنِي إِسْرَائِيلَ اسْكُنُوا الْأَرْضَ فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ الْآخِرَةِ جِئْنَا بِكُمْ لَفِيفًا. And after him we said to the children of Israel, dwell ye in the promised land. And when the time of the promise of the latter days comes, we shall bring you together out of various peoples from all over the world. This is what the meaning.
Yes.
So that further proves beyond a shadow of doubt that this is the age referred to as latter days, when the Jews are being brought back to the Holy Land from all over the world, Lafifa, together. So then what would happen, I have already described.
So yes, they are coming to their death.
No. I didn't say that. I said they are being brought back in fulfillment of God's promise to be given a second chance, to prove to the world that they are worthy of survival as such, and to prove to the world that they have availed of this opportunity and rectified their behavior. You know why this is being done so specially to Jews? You should try to understand that. It is far more important than the question you have raised. The Holy Quran repeatedly tells us that they were the best people, the most gifted people, who were given excellence over the rest of the world. So in a long history of experimentation with human qualities, God made them evolve into really a brilliant people. Today, among the best scientists of the world, you will find the Jews. Among the best financiers of the world, you will find the Jews, occupying the key positions. And in every field of human excellency, they have excelled and proved the point repeatedly that the Holy Quran was right when it stated that God made you excel the rest of the world in qualities of head and heart. But unfortunately, you failed to justify that receipt of Allah's favor. And repeatedly you committed crimes which were contrary to the expectations, which can be expectations from Allah's mercy and special favors upon you. You contradicted those favors. So in the end, God would provide you with a great opportunity once again. You see, to wipe out a people and to destroy a people is not something which Allah hastens to do. Allah is the most patient of all the patient things or patient people. So He goes on extending His mercy and His kindness, and goes on giving chances to a people. If the Jews were really the most talented people on earth, then they should also be extended that opportunity to rectify themselves more than other people. Because here the qualities are at stake. And even those who hate Jews cannot deny that they do possess these qualities. So why should Allah hasten to wipe out these good qualities which were created in the long experimentation of evolutionary history. That is why this second chance is given to them. But the Holy Quran says they will yet not be wiped out. They would be subdued. Maskina is the final fate which has been mentioned here. So there would be a punishment of some sort which we do not know the details of, but after that punishment, after this promise has been fulfilled, they will be subdued, not destroyed. Understand this?
Yes.
But you are not happy with this.
No, in
You
a
want
way,
them to be totally wiped out and destroyed, which God would not have.
Hazur, in a way, why I was thinking that I thought one day the Ahmadis have to come face by face with them, and I would have thought
You will be able to murder some. And this is the attitude which I am out to destroy.
Thank you, Hazur.
Because it is against the culture which the Holy Quran has brought for us, against the nobility which the Holy Quran wants to inculcate among us. We are not a revengeful people. We are the followers of Rahmatul lil Alameen. As such, we must try to achieve those noble qualities which are befitting attributes of those who follow Hazrat Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
أعوذ بالله